Don't be afraid of the dark. Just relax and let the darkness fall over you.
Hello and welcome to Afraidish, a podcast where every 4 episodes we venture into a new state and take a deep dive into the history and paranormal while enjoying some tasty adult beverages. From ghost sightings to hauntings, urban legends and cryptids, let's get weird and afraid-ish together. Hi, I'm Paul.
Hi, I'm Ashley.
And welcome to episode 9, or episode 1 of Kentucky. So welcome back, it's been a while.
Yeah, I feel like it's been my fault.
That's alright.
This story was a real beast.
Yeah.
To get through, let me tell you. And I have ADHD, and distractions are everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere. And hyperfixation is a real thing.
Yeah, I guess I will get started on 5 fun facts about Kentucky.
Okay.
Kentucky is known as the horse capital of the world.
Yes, because of the Kentucky Derby.
Yes. Number 2, the song Happy Birthday to You was penned by sisters Penny and Mildred Hill of Louisville, Kentucky.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Number 3, Post-its were invented by Dr. Spencer Silver, a scientist at 3M. Mm-hmm. The iconic Post-it notes are still solely manufactured at 3M's plant in Cynthiana, Kentucky.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and we have a 3M plant in Springfield.
Yes, but they make different products in different plants.
Yeah, I know. Number 4, there are twice as many bourbon barrels as people in Kentucky.
I love that.
Number 5, Middlesboro, Kentucky is the only city in the U.S. built within a meteor crater.
What?
I know, that's pretty awesome.
We have to go to there.
Yeah. So that's 5 fun facts about Kentucky.
Okay, cool. Cool.
So, would you like to go first since yours is longer?
I would.
All right.
So, I made a joke on Facebook that researching this story has been a real rocky ride. Okay, so this is by far, this carries 2 titles. It is the largest location that we will probably ever talk about. Largest single location. Nice. Or single haunting in terms of like square area. It's quite possibly one of the oldest in terms of human history. Has the longest, and I know you're thinking in America. What?
Yeah.
No, it's got some pretty extensive history, so it's up there. I am talking about Mammoth Caves in Kentucky, obviously in Kentucky. This is also a location that I've been to. I was on a trip at some point as a child, and we stopped in Kentucky and we went to the cave. It was my first time ever being in a cave, and it was really cool, not gonna lie. So, it was originally thought to be hundreds of individual caves interspersed throughout the Kentucky mountainside. It contains over 400 miles of tunnels and caverns, twisting and turning back in on itself in I think it's a 7 square mile tract of land.
Dang, that's crazy.
Yeah. Evidence of human occupation in the area surrounding Mammoth Caves and the Green River go back over 12,000 years.
Holy shit.
And the archaeological record shows early people began exploring the caves as early as 5,000 years ago.
That's awesome.
During that time, the caves were used for a myriad of purposes. Some of them were
What?
I dictated these notes through voice.
Oh my gosh.
This is some of them. Can't even say it. It's too far.
What does it say?
Mormon.
What?
Mormon. The religion, Mormon. Some of the caves were Mormon. Which is hilarious because Joseph Smith said that heaven is like in St. Joseph, Missouri,
Yeah.
real close.
Yeah.
Oh, shit. Okay. Some of them were mined. I'm pretty sure that's what that's supposed to say. Some of the caves were used as mines. Some of them were used as places to bury their deceased loved ones. Some may have been used for shelter. And probably many other uses. You know, what did Neolithic people do in caves? Anything you can imagine. These Neolithic people are the ancestors to the modern day Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Shawnee, the Delaware, the Wyandot, the Mosoplea, and the Yuchi. And I think that there's probably more than that too that didn't get a chance to be named official tribes before they started getting colonized.
Right.
But so basically, no Native American tribes are registered within the state of Kentucky anymore. Any one of the tribes from Kentucky all live in Oklahoma now, on the reservations in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
The original inhabitants of the land that we now call Kentucky used Mammoth Caves as a place to inter their loved ones because they noticed that neither wood nor animals would decompose within the caves. They basically stayed preserved forever, and the caves naturally do mummify human remains that are left in there. And we know that this was intentional interment because there is grave goods placed with the bodies very intentionally. It's not just like somebody had an accident. They also mine soft minerals such as espumite and gypsum, beginning around 1200 BCE. Certainly many miners might have passed away in the caves due to accidents. One such person was found in 1935 crushed beneath a large boulder. It appears that he was scraping the soft minerals from around the base, and the rock crushed him when it shifted.
That's crazy.
The miners used river cane torches to light their way through the piercing darkness. They used oyster shells from the nearby Green River to scrape minerals from the walls of the cave into vessels, which the miners carried with them. They could have been made out of clay pots, gourd bowls, or even deerskin pouches. Sometimes explorers would find caches of these tools stashed in the woods around the various cave openings.
That's cool.
And, of course, the preserved remains of those items are found within the caves. I don't know the frequency and if they're continuing to be found today, but they have found a lot.
Cool.
As is common in most Neolithic cultures, they also decorated the caves with petroglyphs and pictographs. The most famous example of this within Mammoth Cave is a rock formation known as the Devil's Looking Glass, on which Neolithic people used charcoal to draw various humanoid shapes and some shapes that, you know, are kind of squiggly lines. Some people say that they're representing serpents. Some people say that they represent different passages, like a map of the cave.
Right.
Obviously, we'll never know.
Yeah.
Sadly, not much more is known about the original inhabitants of the Green River Valley and the Mammoth Cave system beyond what we can find in the archaeological record and what we know of the native tribes that lived here before we fucked them over.
Yeah.
The earliest written history of Mammoth Cave begins in 1791 when a 19,897 acre tract of land out of the 30,000 acre parcel known as the Pollard Survey was sold to a Thomas Lang Jr. He paid £4,116 or $5,694 in 1791 money, about $165,000 of our money today.
Holy shit, that is cheap.
For just about 20,000 acres of land.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
That's like bigger than a city, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a land surveyor. I don't know what an acre is. I can barely tell you what a foot looks like.
That's insane.
The land sat between the north bank of Bacon Creek and the Green River, and it was later lost to a local tax claim during the War of 1812.
That's shitty.
Yeah. Legend says that the first European visitor to Mammoth Cave was in 1797. Some say it was John Hochin, or his brother Francis Hochin, who was chasing a wounded bear, which led him to the mouth of Mammoth Cave. Now, the problem here is that there were two John Hochins, John Hochin Sr. and John Hochin Jr. Because European men love naming their children after them.
Right.
Weird. This is why you shouldn't do that, people, so that the correct person can be credited with a discovery.
Right.
Anyway, Little John would have only been 10 years old in 1797, so it was highly unlikely that he would have been chasing bears, so it's pretty safe to say that it was his father. But also it could have been the father's brother, Francis or Frank Hochin. Frank owned land that was in much closer proximity to the cave. Nobody at this point owned the land that the cave actually sits on, just to clarify. But Frank's land was much closer. Regardless, 1797 is generally regarded as the year the cave was discovered for the first time, even though people had been there for 12,000 years before.
Right.
Whatever. The land on which the specific entrance known as Mammoth Cave or Mammoth Cave proper was officially surveyed and registered for the first time in 1798 by someone named Valentine Simmons. Simmons began exploring Mammoth Cave to harvest saltpeter and during the War of 1812 due to the Jefferson embargo of 1807. Saltpeter mining was very in demand because they needed it to make gunpowder, and you couldn't import it from overseas anymore.
Yeah.
In July of 1812, two men purchased the land from Simmons to begin the mining of calcium nitrate on an industrial scale. This operation was made possible by the labor force of around 70 enslaved individuals who built and operated the mine and the processing site. After the War of 1812, when the prices fell and the mines were abandoned, the cave became a very minor tourist attraction due to the exploitation of Native American mummies that were discovered inside.
That's crazy.
Yeah. In 1883, a man named Franklin Gorin intended to operate Mammoth Cave as a tourist attraction due to the reduced demand for minerals and the mines no longer operating. Gordon used his slaves as tour guides. A gentleman by the name of Stephen Bishop, who was one of Gorin's indentured slaves, was one of the first people to make extensive maps of the cave and is credited with naming many of the cave's features. He is responsible for discovering about 19 to 20 miles of cave.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
He was a tour guide during the 1840s and 1850s. Gorin did praise Mr. Bishop after his death, calling him the celebrated and great Stephen, and crediting him with being the only person to cross the bottomless pit, and being one of only 3 people, including Gorin, to ever be at the bottom of Gorin's dome, as well as discovering previously unknown tracts of cave.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. John Croghan, a doctor out of Louisville, bought the Mammoth Cave estate, including Mr. Bishop and the other slaves, from Franklin Gorin in 1839. Dr. Croghan suffered from tuberculosis and believed that the atmosphere of the cave might cure himself and his patients. He came up with that theory because of the knowledge that animals and wood would not decay within the cave, and because miners and visitors to the cave would often claim feeling better after spending time in the cave than when they first arrived at the cave.
That's crazy. So, guess what? This might be a tuberculosis episode. Because my story has something to do with tuberculosis.
This is true, yes. Anywho. So, he thought that because people said that they felt better overall after being in the cave, that the air had restorative effects, and that, tuberculosis being a disease of the lungs, this restorative air would restore their lungs. So he built 2 stone cabins and a bunch of wood huts, and in the fall of 1942, Dr. Croghan and about 15, maybe 20 max tuberculosis patients moved into Mammoth Cave, and they began to live there.
That's crazy.
They used animal fat oil lamps and a large fire pit to light inside the cave.
So did they have beds installed in there, or?
Yeah. Like I said, they had the 2 stone cabins, which they think were administrative buildings, like the doctor's office and other stuff, and then the wooden huts, which were the residents, and they weren't all like clustered together. They kind of spread out and put their little hut wherever they wanted it.
Okay, yeah. Well, it was big enough, so.
Yeah. At the beginning of the experiment, everyone reported being surprised at how much better they felt being inside the cave. They said they felt like their lungs had opened up for the very first time and they could finally breathe.
Wow.
But just a few weeks into the experiment, everyone started getting worse and worse and worse. And I mean, obviously, they're burning animal fat oil.
Yeah.
And wood continuously in these caves. I mean, they're big caves.
Yeah.
And they do have ventilation, but it's still...
Inhaling smoke all day like that.
It's an enclosed space. It would be like lighting a fire inside your house. You got a window open.
And your lungs are already messed up, so
right.
That's going to make it worse.
A gentleman named Alfred, an enslaved individual who worked in the cave, recalled, "I used to stand on that rock and blow the horn to call them to dinner. There were 15 of them, and they looked more like a company of skeletons than anything else."
That's wild.
Yeah. During the duration of the tuberculosis experiment, tours were still being provided through the cave system. It was not uncommon for a tourist to round a corner and be confronted by a patient in a hospital gown and slippers carrying an oil lamp, shuffling through the various passages. Can you imagine a more bleak place?
No. That would be crazy.
I mean, it's one thing to visit a cave. It's a whole other thing to live in one.
Yeah.
The patient's coughs and hacking could also be heard echoing throughout the various chambers and tunnels, which often would terrify the visitors if they didn't know what was happening.
Right.
And the experiment ultimately was a disaster. Most people only lived for around 4 months within the cave before either leaving or dying. It's reported that everyone who left the cave died within days or weeks of leaving the cave.
Yeah.
25 years after the experiment, the Atlantic Monthly wrote, "Like plants shut out from the generous fostering sun, they paled and died. The appearance of those who came out after 2 or 3 months' residence in the cave described as frightful." Dr. Krogan would succumb to the disease in 1849. Though the wooden structures are no longer there, the stone cabins are still able to be viewed inside the cave on several tours. Over the course of the latter part of the 19th century, the Mammoth Cave would gain notoriety and fame. It attracted many famous people, including the Booth brothers, Edwin and his brother John Wilkes, and singer Jenny Lind. As the 20th century dawned, Kentucky would enter an era known as the Kentucky Cave Wars. This was a time when tour guides and commercial cave owners were fighting each other for who could attract the most visitors and make the most money. If you think about it, this was post-Civil War. You can't really do a whole lot of farming in this area because it's in the mountains and it's rocky soil. So the lower class people who would normally be farmers made their money by taking wealthy explorers on tours of the caves.
Yeah.
Eventually, railroads would be built, allowing easier access to the caves, and even a lock would be built nearby so that a ferry could bring tourists close to the cave. Yeah. Apparently, the caves of Kentucky were as exotic during this time as the Amazon rainforest is to us. It was such a novelty.
Nice.
One of the most famous explorers of the early 20th century was a man named Floyd Collins. He was born and raised in the area and grew up in the caves. He, from a young child, spent time exploring these caves. He spent about 10 years exploring the Flint Ridge cave system and is credited with discovering the cave known as Crystal Cave. The location of Crystal Cave made it very difficult to reach, so not a lot of tourists were willing to pay to go spelunking in it. Collins began searching for a new cave that he could open up to tourists for profit. He discovered a narrow crevice on a neighbor's property, and he would convince that neighbor to allow him to explore it. That cave is now known as Sand Cave. It is described as being little more than a collection of tubes and shafts no wider than an air conditioning duct.
Wow.
And far twistier and much more dangerous.
That's crazy.
Collins is believed to be the first person or one of the first people to postulate that the caves in the area were at least connected to each other in some way. Obviously, he would have no idea just how expansive, but he felt that all of the caves were connected to each other in some way. He would never live to see his theory proved correct.
Yeah.
In early February of 1925, Floyd Collins was attempting to widen a very narrow passage inside Sand Cave when he became trapped 55 feet below ground. This is where I was having the panic attack.
Shit.
Rescuers were able to reach him and bring him food and water for about 4 days, when, after 4 days of being trapped, a rock collapsed in the opening of the crawlway he was in, sealing him off from aid.
Crap.
They were able to maintain communication verbally with him for about 14 days, and he passed away about 3 days before they were able to reach him with the shaft that they were digging from the surface.
That sucks.
Yeah. He died on February 13th, 1925. He was 37 years old, and his body was finally recovered nearly 2 months later.
Wow.
He's buried inside Mammoth Cave Baptist Church Cemetery, just outside the entrance of Mammoth Cave.
Wow.
I had a visceral reaction reading that. I caught a lot of my feelings out of that, I literally cannot imagine a worse way to die.
I know.
I literally can't. Like, the most gruesome murder, like, as long as it's fast, it's over with. Like, suffocating in an air conditioning duct is not my idea of a good time.
Yeah. Just to know you're actually dying and
for 14 days.
14 days, yeah.
Yeah. He probably didn't... He probably had hope that he knew that they were building a shaft or digging a shaft to get to him, but... Oh, fuck, man. Like, no.
Just the feeling of running out of air, that sucks.
Well, he probably starved to death.
Yeah.
14 days without food or water. At the time, the Floyd Collins rescue attempt made national news, and it attracted celebrities, Congress, and state legislators would leave Congress. Whenever there was, like, new news would reach them, they would literally leave session to go hear the news. It was big news. It was not the reason that the American government decided to designate Mammoth Caves as a national park, but it played a huge role in that mission, in that quest to get that named a national park. They really kind of exploited his death.
Yeah.
I mean, at the same time, like, he loved the caves. It's kind of sweet that he inspired it to be preserved as a national park. But the way that they went about it was very exploitative of a dead man. During the latter part of the 20th century, more and more discoveries were made, including the collection of many of the separate caves, connecting all back into the same system. Eventually, the Native American mummies that had been used as tourist attractions were finally reinterred in sections of the cave that are now closed off to tourists. At least they got some respect in the end.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the ghost stories and paranormal experiences.
Nice.
So.
That's a hell of a history, though.
Yeah, I mean... And if you think, like, that's just the written history. We don't know anything about the people those 12,000 years.
Right.
Up into the late 1700s. How many other people died in the same way Floyd Collins did?
Yeah.
That we'll never know their names.
Yep.
So according to nationalparkstraveler.org, there have been more than 150 documented paranormal occurrences in Mammoth Cave.
Damn.
And they're usually all experienced by scientists and the tour guides, like people, geologists and stuff. Which, honestly, 150 with 12,000 years of history, I'm surprised that there's not a larger number.
Yeah. Yeah.
Given the fact that the caves are carved out of limestone, and which is an extremely porous material, and there's lots of, like, water, and it was water that made the caves. Both of those materials are credited with causing paranormal activity.
Yeah.
Limestone is considered a recording material. It records energy, which to me, I interpret that as more of like a residual style haunting versus an intelligent thing. But water emits energy, which spirits, in theory, spirits can absorb that energy and manifest themselves. So, we talked about the tuberculosis colony. If a patient died within the cave, they were laid out on a stone slab in front of one of the stone cabins, most likely the doctor's office. This rock is called Corpse Rock, and if you linger in the area long enough, it is said that you might even hear some coughing off in the distance.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. Then Stephen Bishop, the renowned guide who passed away in 1856, less than a year after becoming a free man. He and many of the other men who were enslaved as guides are buried in the church cemetery, same location that Collins is buried. And a lot of the modern tour guides feel that these men return to their beloved caves occasionally, which I don't know if that's sweet or sad. Yeah. I mean, they were enslaved there, But in the case of Stephen Bishop, anyone that knew him did say that he had a passion for the caves. It was truly something he loved. That doesn't make it better.
Yeah. I mean, if I loved somewhere and it was my passion, I would probably stay there.
Right. Well,
But I don't know.
I mean, he was a slave. I would hope that he would go on to a more peaceful afterlife experience.
We don't know what happens. So.
This is true. I don't know. I just it makes me sad thinking of an enslaved man trapped in the place where he was enslaved for all eternity. Anyway, moving on. During one particular tour, a member of the group interrupted the guide and asked, "Who is that up on that ledge?" And the entire group turned, and everyone saw a man in a long-sleeve shirt with a droopy-brimmed hat carrying a lantern. He was seen from multiple different angles, from people standing at different points of the cave, but everyone agreed that it was probably just a trick of the shadows.
Sure.
Could it have been Mr. Bishop himself? Other times, guards have reported being shoved playfully, hearing footsteps, and other just purely unexplained occurrences. I don't know about you, but if an unseen force shoves me, I'm not going to take that as playful.
Yeah.
On a tour called the Violet City Tour, a tour guide noticed an African-American family standing towards the back of the room, which he thought was unusual because there weren't any black people on that tour at that time. When they left and headed down, there were no black people in that group.
Wow.
And I don't know if that was right before the blackout portion of that tour or after the lights came on. But during that tour, they turn all the lights off so that you can experience just how black and thick the darkness is inside the cave.
Wow.
There's absolutely no light. And he saw the family, and then the family was not there anymore. This particular room happens to be known as the Methodist Church because when it was being used as a mine, the miners would often hold religious services there. If there were any African people in attendance of these services, they always stood at the back of the chamber away from the white miners.
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Collins, he was basically a troglodyte. He lived in the caves. He died in the caves. I mean, he didn't live in the caves, but you know what I mean.
Right, yeah.
He spent all of his free time and time working exploring those caves. He died in sand caves, which was at the time assumed to be its own independent cave, but now we know it is connected to the Mammoth Cave system. So, I mean, is it a stretch to imagine that he haunts the entire system? Just 400 miles of caves to explore for all eternity.
Well, maybe he's still exploring.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, with the tragic circumstances around his death, the traumatic way that he died, either he, you could imagine him being trapped there, or he loved the cave so much that he chose to stay there. And then you have to think of the people we don't know who lived and died in those caves.
Yeah.
What were their beliefs around death? What, if any, entities did they believe or fear was living in the caves?
Yeah.
Any residual energy from that period of history? Who knows?
I'm sure there is. Yeah.
So, anyway, that's Mammoth Cave. It ended up not being quite as long as I expected it was going to be, but I still feel like that was a pretty good chunk of time.
That's really good. I liked it. I liked the history and the hauntings. I mean, as much history as there is, I'm sure there's a lot of hauntings, like you said.
Right. I mean, the energy, like, whatever you believe about what happens to human consciousness when we die, the amount of energetic buildup within those caves, just immense.
Yeah. All right, my turn. So my story is Waverly Hills Sanatorium.
I've heard of this place.
Yeah. Just outside of Louisville, Kentucky, there lies a plot of land bought by Major Thomas H. Hayes in 1883. He built a family home on that land, and since there wasn't a school nearby, he built a one-room schoolhouse for his children. He hired a teacher by the name of Lizzie Lee Harris. She was a huge fan of the Waverly novels, a long series of novels written by Sir Walter Scott. She asked Hayes if she could name the school Waverly School. Not only did he like the name for the school, he liked it so much he called the entire property Waverly Hill. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about tuberculosis. In 1882, Robert Koch's discovery of the tubercle bacillus revealed that TB is not genetic, but rather highly contagious. It is also somewhat preventable through good hygiene. After some hesitation, the medical community embraced Koch's findings, and the U.S. launched massive public health campaigns to educate the public on tuberculosis, prevention, and treatment.
Interesting.
Toward the beginning of the 19th century, tuberculosis, aka consumption, aka the White Death, was devastating the United States. The disease had killed 1 in every 7 people that had ever lived. Tuberculosis, or TB, is caused by a bacterium called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. The bacteria usually attacks the lungs, but TB bacteria can attack any part of the body, such as the kidney, spine, and brain. Oh. Yeah. Not everyone infected with TB bacteria becomes sick. As a result, 2 TB-related conditions exist: latent TB infection, or LTBI, and TB disease. If not treated properly, TB disease can be fatal. Latent TB infection: the TB bacteria can live in the body without making you sick. This is called latent TB infection, and most people who breathe in TB bacteria and become infected, the body can fight the bacteria to stop them from growing. Mm-hmm. People with latent TB infection have no symptoms, don't feel sick, can't spread TB bacteria to others, usually have a positive TB skin test reaction or positive TB blood test, may develop TB disease if they do not receive treatment for latent TB infection.
Mm-hmm. That's why, as kids, do you remember getting TB testing?
Yeah. I used to work at a nursing home, and we had to take TB tests. Mm-hmm. Many people who have latent TB infection never develop TB disease. In these people, the TB bacteria remain inactive for a lifetime without causing disease. But in other people, especially people who have a weak immune system, the bacteria become active, multiply, and cause the TB disease. Wow. And the TB disease is TB bacteria become active if the immune system can't stop them from growing. When TB bacteria are active or multiplying in your body, this is called TB disease. People with TB disease are sick. They may also be able to spread the bacteria to people they spend time with every day. Mm-hmm. Many people who have latent TB infections never develop TB disease. Some people develop TB disease soon after becoming infected, within weeks, before their immune system can fight the TB bacteria. Other people may get sick years later when their immune system becomes weak for another reason. For people with weak immune systems, especially those with HIV infection, the risk of developing TB disease is much higher than for people with normal immune systems. Much of the 1800s, TB patients sought out, quote, the cure in sanatoriums. Mm-hmm. Sanatoriums at the time were built on high hills surrounded by woods to create peace and a serene atmosphere. Yes. It was thought that fresh air, good food, and sunshine would help cure the disease, along with competent medical supervision. The staff did all they could to keep the morale high and keep the patients in good spirits. This was also what was thought to keep the patients alive longer and not succumb to the disease. In 1884, Edward Trudeau opened America's first sanatorium at Saranac Lake in New York, where patients sat outside on the wide sun porches to take in the fresh air cure. In 1900, Louisville had the highest rate of TB death rate in America. The area was built on low swampland in the Ohio Valley. It was a breeding ground for disease. The search began for a proper location to construct the much-needed facility. Eventually, Hayes property was chosen for several reasons: distance from the city, its picturesque, tranquil view, as well as its high altitude with increased airflow. The board decided to keep the name Waverly as it had a peaceful sound to it.
Not anymore.
In 1908, ground was broken on what would become known as Waverly Hills Sanatorium. No one is quite sure when or how the second E was dropped from Waverly, because originally it was Waverley, but they dropped the last E. Over the next 2 years of construction, a 2-story wooden administration buildings, as well as 2 connected open-air pavilions on either side, each housed 20 male and female patients, were built for $25,000.
Wow.
And I didn't do the math of how much that would cost today.
I just use there's a Google calculator.
I know. I didn't take the time.
Oh.
On July 26, 1910, the new sanatorium officially opened. It was originally a wood-framed 2-story building designed for 40 to 50 patients. Due to the rapid increase in TB cases, the facility quickly became overcrowded with 140 patients.
Oh my god.
Yeah. In 1914, a children's pavilion was added with another 50 beds. This increased the hospital's ability to hold 130 patients. The children's ward was built to house the children with tuberculosis and children whose parents were stricken with the disease. So it basically had a mix of children with TB and kids without it. So you know they're going to get sick.
It's basically just kids with TB.
Yeah. In March 1924, construction began on a new 180,000 square foot 5-story facility, and that's including the rooftop area.
Wow. From
donations of money and land. On October 17, 1926, the new Waverly Hills Sanatorium opened. It featured separate patient rooms, sunrooms, modern laboratories, and recreational spaces with room for just over 400 patients.
Wow.
It also featured a 500-foot-long tunnel that spanned from the first floor of the building to the bottom of the hill. Supplies could be brought in from the bottom, and the countless bodies of deceased patients were discreetly removed from the top.
Yeah, they call it the body chute, don't they?
The body chute, yep. Once the patients, doctors, and nurses walked into the facility, they became residents and lived inside the sanatorium. This was a self-sustained community with its own zip code and post office.
Wow.
They had laundry facilities, an auto maintenance garage. They raised animals and had their own butchery.
Wow.
And had hundreds of acres of farmland.
Okay.
It's pretty cool. The procedures tested out on patients by the doctors were as grim as the disease itself.
Yeah. I know I'm not going to like this.
You're not. I didn't even like it when I read it. It was...
Is it going to be worse than the panic attack I had about the air conditioning duct suffocation?
We'll find out. A lot of patients did not survive these experimental medical practices. Yeah. Take a deep breath. A few treatments included lobectomy and pneumectomy, which involved doctors surgically removing infected parts of the lung and sometimes the entire lung. Another procedure, theracoplasty, was the removal of several rib bones from the chest wall to collapse a lung. It was common for the average patient to require 7 to 8 ribs to be removed during this time.
Oh my god.
That is insane.
Oh, no, thank you. Oh.
There was also the sun treatment, which theorized that if a patient bathed out in the sun, it would help kill the bacteria that cause TB. The doctors would also insert a balloon into the patient's lungs and fill them with air to help their breathing.
Wait, I have a question though. How does that work? This might be a stupid question, but how does that work? Because a balloon is a sack.
Right.
You're putting a sack into a sack. How's the air going to get from inside the balloon sack to the lungs? Is it perforated?
I don't know. Well, my next line is, unfortunately, these procedures were ineffective and led to no real cure.
Duh!
So as far as the balloons, I don't know what they were thinking. I mean, these were just new theorized ideas by these doctors that...
But, like, I have to be missing something because I'm not smarter than a doctor.
Right. I mean, well, basically...
How do you get a balloon to transfer air from inside the balloon to outside of itself? Do they pop it?
I don't know.
Inside the person's lungs? What?
This is back then when they had no idea.
I'm having an existential crisis over this balloon thing here, though.
I mean, I don't know.
Okay, move on.
Okay.
I could spend too much time.
Yeah. Thousands of people came to Waverly hoping for a miracle. Sadly, roughly around 8,000 people didn't make it out alive. To maintain a high morale among patients, the bodies of the deceased patients were moved in secret through a hidden tunnel to some railroad tracks at the bottom of the hill where trains would take the bodies away.
But all that does is arouse suspicion. Jenny was here yesterday, now she's not here. They didn't bring a hearse. Where'd she go?
I don't know. This tunnel would be called the Body Chute. With the discovery of a new antibiotic, streptomycin, in 1943, there was finally a way to combat tuberculosis. However, it wouldn't be until 1949 when streptomycin would be available to the patients at Waverly Hills. This new treatment meant that newer cases could now be treated as outpatients in a regular hospital.
Wow.
Over the following years, the population of Waverly began to decrease until it closed in June 1961. The buildings subsequently sat empty for nearly a year before the facility was reopened in 1963 as Woodhaven Geriatric Center, a live-in nursing facility for elderly patients with dementia, mobility issues, or severe mental disabilities.
So it went from being a sanatorium to a sanitarium.
Yes.
Ugh!
Yeah. Woodhaven operated in this capacity until 1982, when it was closed by the state. A grand jury found multiple instances of patient abuse and signs of neglect of the facility itself. Woodhaven was closed and all of its patients were transferred to another care facility.
Because sanitariums have never been a good idea.
Yeah.
They don't end well.
Well, it didn't actually say it's a sanitarium.
But, okay, Woodhaven Geriatric Facility?
Yeah, Geriatric Center.
Okay, and read the description?
It's a live-in nursing facility for elderly patients with dementia, mobility issues, or severe mental disabilities.
Severe mental disabilities. Yes,
yeah,
it would have been, and maybe I'm incorrect, but usually that's how these places operate. It's an old folks' home, but you can send your crazy aunt there who's only 36, but
Probably.
She's hysterical.
Right.
That's the sanitarium. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm just being extra. I don't know.
I don't know. Anyways, according to Kentucky Historical Institutions, after Woodhaven Geriatric Center was closed for criminal abuse, the majority of the land and buildings were sold off to a developer who intended to use the main building as a minimum security state prison. However, a massive wave of protests from locals quashed this plan, and backup plan of turning the building into apartments also collapsed due to the lack of funds. In 1996, Waverly Hills was purchased by a nonprofit ecumenical group, which is a group that represents several Christian churches, to build the most logical possible thing for the location. The world's tallest statue of Jesus. The goal was to make a 150-foot tall statue on the roof of the sanatorium modeled after the famous statue of Christ, the Redeemer, in Rio de Janeiro. However...
Isn't there one of those in Branson?
No. It's in... Is it in Branson or is it in Eureka Springs?
Is it in Eureka? It's in Eureka Springs.
Yeah, Eureka Springs.
There's one in Ohio or somewhere. There's one. Every state's got one.
Oh, statues of white Jesus.
Yes.
However, the cost of the statue was estimated to be $4 million, while the interior renovations turning the hospital into an art and worship center would have been between $8 million and $10 million.
Golly gee. Woo!
That's a lot.
Better call the bakers.
Donations to the project totaled a mere $3,000.
You didn't televangelize enough. I bet if you had gone on that TV with the rat sob story, you'd have got the money.
So giant tuberculosis Jesus was canceled.
Yeah.
The building,
for the best.
Yes. The building and its surroundings were sold in 2001 to its current owners, Charles and Tina Mattingly, who established the Waverly Hills Historical Society to raise money for the restoration of the building's interior.
Okay. So they do have a goal.
Yeah.
Okay.
To this end, Waverly Hills now primarily serves as a haunted attraction with ghost tours and annual haunted house events. And now for the hauntings.
Okay.
Thousands of people were infected with tuberculosis. At the turn of the 20th century, many hospitals were overflowing. That meant special institutions had to be built. Sanatoriums were built to save the lives of the infected. But that wasn't the case for many. If someone had to go to Waverly Hills, they most likely died there. The same goes for the children of family members who were there. Today, many ghost hunters and curious people have taken tours. Many reports of children's laughter can be heard throughout the 5th floor of the building, which is the rooftop. A little boy named Timmy can be seen with a leather ball. He's thought to have fallen or even been pushed off the 5th floor where the children used to play. So if you go there and a little leather ball rolls and hits your foot, that's little Timmy wanting to play with you.
Ugh.
In 1928, a nurse was found hanging from an exposed pipe or light fixture in room 502, allegedly dying by suicide.
Allegedly?
Allegedly. She was 29 years old, pregnant, and unmarried. And I think it was possibly a doctor's...
Yes.
Maybe, yeah.
That was a rumor.
Yeah, it was a rumor. Supposedly she was depressed over the situation and took her own life.
That's the generally accepted truth.
Yeah. In 1932, another nurse, who was later in room 502, was thought to have jumped off the top floor to her death, although it is also thought she may have been pushed. There is no evidence to prove either one of these stories.
Okay.
Other common sightings include an older woman with chains around her wrists, often believed to have been a resident when the building was a geriatric center. This ghost howls for help, only to run away screaming when anyone approaches her. Doppelgangers, also known as double walkers, are a type of spirit that can mimic the appearance, voice, and mannerisms of anyone or anything it encounters. Tour guides at Waverly Hills have reported seeing doppelgangers of themselves and others.
Shit.
In some cases, the doppelgangers were almost identical, except for black holes where the eyes should be. Another notable apparition is known as the Creeper.
Oh, I hate creepers.
And
No, I really do.
Due to its creeping, crawling, and movements up and around the walls, ceilings, and floors. Mm-hmm. It's said that proximity to the Creeper brings it with it an overwhelming feeling of dread.
Mm-hmm. No shit.
Yeah. While there's no explanation for who or what the Creeper might be, some think he might have been a mistreated patient whose contorted appearance reflects the trauma they experienced in life.
That's... yeah. Entirely possible.
Yeah. At any rate, that's a lot of darkness for a place founded on the principle of fighting disease with sunshine. If you went ghost hunting at Waverly Hills Sanatorium, would it make you afraid-ish?
Yeah, I'd be fine unless the fucking Creeper showed up.
I mean, it's supposedly one of the most haunted places in America. Mm-hmm. And I would visit there.
I would probably visit there during the daytime. Not at nighttime.
I don't know. It would be so fun to go ghost hunting, I think.
I wouldn't... I don't know.
Yeah.
Going to Pt1 Castle on a ghost hunt is one thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, do you have anything else?
I do not.
I hope everybody liked the bonus episode.
Yeah. Let us know what you thought about that. Is that something that we should continue doing? I liked recording it.
Yeah.
Except for that one part.
This isn't something we're going to do right after we do that state. We're going to do like 2 states and then do a bonus for the state before, and then like we did with Missouri.
Yeah.
So we get like another, 4 episodes before we have a bonus.
Yeah, because basically it's just rehashing that state. Kind of seems silly to
be redundant.
do 4 episodes of the state and then rehash it right after.
It was a lot of fun. I liked the extra stuff. Mm-hmm. So hopefully other people did too.
Yeah.
Especially the new story about the black-eyed kids.
Fuck that shit.
That was pretty creepy.
No, I didn't like that part. That was the part I was talking about.
You're right. So if you have any stories or requests of anything you want to hear about, or if you know anybody who does, please email us at afraidishpodcast@gmail.com, Instagram and Facebook at afraidishpodcast, Twitter at afraid_ish, which I never really use Twitter. I just have stuff that gets posted.
Okay.
So I never use Twitter.
I never use Twitter. Like, I never have used Twitter.
Well, it's one of the biggest social media platforms, so I had to...
Yeah. No, I've never used it. I mean, I probably posted to it like 4 times.
Yeah. And visit the website at afraid-ishpodcast.com. All the links will be in the show notes. And as always, don't be afraid of the dark.
Be afraid-ish of what's in it.
See you next time.
Ta-ta for now.